Hello, and welcome to Baha'i Blogcast, with me, your host, Rainn Wilson. This is where I interview members of the Baha'i Faith and other friends from all over the world about their hearts and minds and souls, their spiritual journeys, what they're interested in, and what makes them tick. Enjoy. Smitty, thanks so much for joining the Baha'i Blogcast. So great to see you today.
I'm delighted to be here, and I've been looking forward to this, and particularly after seeing the long line of people you've had with you before. What a stellar list.
Well, great. Well, I love so much the work that you're doing with the Center for Race Amity, but before we get to that and the documentary work, you're being a professor, etc., let's go back. I want to hear a little bit about you. I want to hear your story, and especially how you came to be a Baha'i.
Well, interestingly, Rainn, there's this quotation that I will paraphrase. And Baha'u'llah says, so powerful is the word Baha that it has but to fall on the ears of an individual. And that individual will be given the opportunity to investigate his cause. It doesn't say the person will become a Baha'i. And so I had that bounty actually, Rainn, as a small child. I grew up in South Carolina, Greenville, South Carolina, and of course in a very rigidly segregated era. And my family is steeped in the Baptist faith, fundamentalist Baptist, and we're all big churchgoers. My family has a long, long history going back to the emancipation of my great-great-grandfather of having preachers in the family. In fact, my great-grandfather built what is one of the oldest still standing Baptist churches in the state of South Carolina, African-American Christian Hope. But anyway, I grew up in Greenville, went to Springfield Baptist Church, and every Sunday as a little boy, and what a glorious, I can remember being in that church pew, sitting between my grandmother and my mother, like 4 or 5 years old, leaning on my grandmother. People sang and rejoiced. And one of the interesting things that happened is that about once a month, either first or third Sunday, I can't remember particularly, but this white lady would come to our church, and her name, who I got to know later and got to know her personally and to love her so dearly. But as a small boy, 4 or 5 years old, Junie Faley is her name. She would come to our church, and in the tradition of the church, the Baptist tradition, she would stand up. She would announce herself doing the greeting and recognition of visitors, and she'd stand up once a month. She'd, my name is Junie Faley, and I'm a member of the Baha'i Faith, and we believe in the oneness of mankind, and I came to worship with you this Sunday. And then she'd sit down. Now, she came so regularly, Rainn, that my brothers and sisters and I, we used to call it White Lady Sunday. As kids say, oh, it's White Lady Sunday. And she was a diminutive she was like all of 4'10", white hair, big bulging blue eyes, and a very high-pitched little voice. And so that's when I literally first heard Baha'i as a small child. And then later, thanks to the power of this dispensation, the spiritual power released by Baha'u'llah, I had the bounty of investigating later as a teenager the Baha'i Faith. It came back, circled back to me in high school. And that's a whole interesting and funny story, but I don't want to spend too much time on it. But
well, wait a minute. If there's an interesting and funny story to be had, then we've got to dig in. Come on.
Oh, you okay? So fast forward. I'm in high school, and I had a tumultuous early teenage years. A very troubled young fellow.
Okay.
In the sense that basically was a hellraiser and troublemaker kind of guy, and actually spent some time in the reformatory as a result. And it was a rebellion, actually. I have a younger brother. This is a sidebar, but my baby brother, for 13 years, I was the baby in my family.
Okay.
And my grandmother, everybody doted on me. My mother, who was divorced initially when I was like 2 years old, remarried. And so here I am at 13, and my mother has my younger brother.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
And upset my world, man. I went from being the kingpin to, everybody's doting on baby Ricky, you know. So
Uh-huh.
I went hell to bell, just doing all kinds of crazy, crazy stuff. But anyway, long story short, I come back to, from reform school after a 7-month stint. And one of my classmates in high school was Ricky Abercrombie. Ricky was also a notorious hell-raising teenager. And he lived in another part of town, but we'd see each other at school. He was an athlete. We were on a track team together. Fast forward, we're in school one day. We're athletes. At the school I went to, we all got free lunches if you played a sport. So if it was track season, you get free lunch if you're on the track team. If it was basketball season, you get free lunch during the basketball season. If you played football, etc. So it was springtime. Rick was on the track team. We're in the cafeteria. Teenage boys were wolfing down these lunches. And we look over at Rick, and he's not eating lunch. And we say, hey, man, Rick, what's up, man? Why are you not eating that lunch? He says, well, I'm fasting. And we say, you're what? Because where I grew up, you're either AME, African Methodist Episcopal, or Baptist, principally. That's who you were. There were just a tiny sprinkling of Catholics, but not many. But those are the predominant. And neither of those, AME or Baptist, fast. So we're like, you're doing what? Fasting?
And this is South Carolina, and this is the late 50s?
Yeah, no, this is in the 60s. This is in 1963, about, okay? This is the spring of 63. So we says, you're fasting? What are you talking about fasting, man? He says, well, but we looked at Rick like he had 3 heads. Nobody fast where we were in our community. And we had noticed, actually, because Rick had a reputation of being a big party guy and a hellraiser.
Yeah.
And Rick had fallen off drinking wine with us and doing all kinds of other things. And so we said, well, what? He says, yeah. He says, well, I'm a Baha'i now. And Baha'u'llah has come. Christ has returned. And his new name is Baha'u'llah. And we says, oh, God, Rick has been drinking too much bootleg, man. Now, it's gone to his brain. I mean, he's gone crazy. And we laughed at him and says, okay, so you say Christ has returned. His name is Boobalooba. And so, so he became, sort of like the joke. And I said, well, okay, that's good, Rick. How about giving me your lunch? So,
you got a free lunch out of the deal. That's good, Smitty.
Yeah. So anyway, but that started at that point to set up my own personal opportunity to investigate the Baha'i Faith. And at that time, Rick did something that was totally unusual for our community, the Black community. Rick actually went to London to the first International Baha'i Conference as a junior in high school.
Wow.
And we were amazed, because first of all, nobody in our little community ever went. The closest you go is to the next town,
Yeah.
down to Spartanburg or Clemson. Some people got to go to New York, but certainly not not to London, England. And so that was, and he came back and he was talking about, we were curious because we never knew anybody in our circle who had traveled. And he was talking about Baha'is from around the world. And so this is weird, but okay, he got to go to England, right?
Yeah.
As a part of this new religion. Fast forward, Rick was one of the few people, we had 3 or 4 teenagers in my class who had their own car. Rick was one of those. But Rick got his car the old fashioned way. He built it, literally. No. Rick Abercrombie is a mechanical genius. I mean, this guy could fix anything. And before he became a Baha'i, some of us would go to the junkyard. He'd tell us what parts he wanted. We'd scale the fence, steal the parts, bring them back. And, he put them together in this car. And he literally had the old Ford Coupe that had the rumble seat in the back. Literally, he'd cruise around in this thing, and he was my way to get to go to parties. So if I want to go to a party, hey Rick, you going to Brenda's party? Come by and give me a ride. He'd always give me a ride. But eventually, Rick started saying he kept pressing me and other friends to go to these Baha'i fireside meetings, and we say, yeah, we'll go. But then every time he would call and say, hey, Smitty, I'm going to the fireside this Saturday. I'll come by and pick you up. And I didn't want to go. So I say, oh, Rick, I got to babysit my younger brother, man. Sorry, I can't make it. So then he caught on to that, right? So next time I want to go to, hey, Rick, you going to Brenda's party next week? He said, nah, Smith, I'd love to give you a ride, man, but I got to babysit my younger brother. So I said, okay. So me and some of the guys, Brenda, actually, and Kirby Wallace and Steve Moore, all of who actually became Baha'is. We all became Baha'is pretty much together. But
Wow.
we went, so Rick would pick us up. We'd jump in this old Ford, and first fireside I went to, we're driving along. The last pickup was Kirby Wallace, and we picked Kirby up. And Rick says, well, okay, we're going over to Overbrook. We say, Overbrook? Overbrook that's where white people live, man. And so he said, no, it's all right. And so we're driving into this white section of town. Now, this is late 1963, and times are tumultuous in the South. And I'm riding along, and I say, Rick, you sure you know where you're going? And he said, yeah, it's all right. And I says, man, but we could get shot over here. So we pull into this white neighborhood. And I said, no, man, you need to turn around. I'm not going over here. And so he says, no, we're almost there now. And we pull right up in front of this big house. And we're all in the car. And there were Rick and 3 others, me, Brenda, Kirby, and Steve. There were 4 of us, actually. They were all crammed back there in the rumble seat. So this guy comes to the door, and he sticks his head. He says, Rick, is that you? And Rick said, yeah, it's me, Dick. He says, I got some friends. He said, oh, you come on in. So I am frozen. I'm saying, oh, hell, here I am in this white neighborhood. It's like 7:30 at night. If I stay here in the car, somebody's going to call the cops or worse, come out here and shoot me. So my best bet is to go in the house with everybody else. We go into this house, And it's the first time I've ever been into a white person's house through the front door. And I go in and I'm really nervous as hell, Rainn. I'm, like, oh God, what is going on? And immediately I go into the room and there's this big living room. And in this living room, there are all these people, about 20 of them, black and white people. And I'm saying, what is going on? I mean, these, and then I looked around the room and I saw Mrs. Hurd, my grandmother's best friend and quilting buddy. There's Miss Hurd sitting here in this living room with all these white people and, some other black people.
Was the little white woman who came into church, was she there that day or not so much?
Yes. No, and there's Junie Faley.
Aha.
What I find out is Junie Faley had befriended a number of the black women in our church and had been having them at her home for tea. So they had a friendship going
Ah.
on.
Mm-hmm.
But Miss Hurd and none of the other black women, they weren't spreading the word about this because this was taboo, man. And plus, there's this Baha'i stuff, which is so strange and exotic. You don't want anybody to know that you're going around with any Baha'is. So, so, so this is what's happening. And but seeing Mrs. Hurd there was a real point of relief. I said, "Oh boy, Miss Hurd's here. It must be all right." She's my grandmother, one of my grandmother's closest friends. So there I am with all these Baha'is. And then there's Ricky's father, who Papa Jake, we called him, Charles Abercrombie, there. And he's giving this Baha'i talk. And Charles Abercrombie had, at that point, become a real source of serious gossip in the Greenville black community.
Okay.
Because Charles Abercrombie had been the chief steward at Tabernacle Baptist, which was another church, but one of the other large black churches in Greenville.
Mm-hmm.
And Charles Abercrombie had become a Baha'i because his investigation started because he saw the profound effect that Baha'i had on Ricky's life. And he said,
And I hate to go down this rabbit hole, but how did 13-year-old or 15-year-old Ricky find out about the Baha'i faith?
how did Ricky find out? Our friend Harry Johnson, who is actually, and I haven't seen Harry since I was a kid, Eulalia Bobo, who is a great Baha'i teacher.
These are some great names, by the way. Eulalia Bobo, that's fantastic.
Well, Eulalia Bobo, though, is an icon in the black Baha'i community. She was one of the greatest, literally, Rainn, one of the greatest Baha'i teachers of all time. I mean,
Wow.
her travel teaching, and I'm not exaggerating, rivaled Louis Gregory's in the South.
Wow.
She constantly, and even in Greenville, they have a little snippet in the Greenville News. Eulalia, sister of Joe Louis, gives talk on Baha'i. And she'd come to Greenville and give a Baha'i talk. Eulalia Bobo was an incredible Bible scholar. And she got to know people in the black community in Greenville. And one of the people she got to know were the parents of Harry Johnson, who was a friend of ours. And she adopted Harry. But Harry was also a friend of Rick Abercrombie's. All of us, though we lived in different parts of town, we basically went to one of three schools and congregated at the high school because there was only one high school in Greenville for blacks. But anyway, so that's one of the first contacts Rick had with the Baha'i Faith.
Mm.
I don't know the full story of his investigation.
That's all right.
But Rick grew up as I did. We're Bible Baha'is. In other words, we came into the Baha'i Faith literally through scripture and challenging all of those things.
Wow. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and so his father was a preeminent Bible guy.
Yeah, and you were talking about the controversy that his father becoming a member of the Baha'i Faith.
Yeah, well, the controversy became because Papa Jake actually saw the impact of the Baha'i Faith on Rick's personal life. And he'd said often, he said, when I saw the change in Ricky's life, I could not help but investigate what it causes. And the Abercrombies are a big family. There are 8 kids, okay? And Papa Jake said, I want to investigate. So when Eulalia came to town, Papa Jake went over to one of the firesides that the Baha'is held and heard Eulalia speak. Then, as he got to know her, he challenged her and said to Eulalia, if you can show me, if you can prove to me in Scripture that Baha'u'llah is the return of Christ, I'll become a Baha'i too.
Wow.
So on one of her visits, they sat down, and this is a fabled story in the Greenville Baha'i community. And those who know the Abercrombies, I mean, it may be embellished a bit now, but the story has it, Eulalia came over. Abercrombie is what we call Rick's mother, Lily Abercrombie. But Abercrombie put on a pot of coffee, and so Papa Jake and Eulalia sat there all night, her and him, and went through the scriptures. And the next day, Papa Jake said, "The Lord of the age has come."
Wow. Wow.
What did he do? He went to Tabernacle Baptist Church that Sunday, stood up in front of the entire congregation, and said, "Brothers and sisters, I have a message. Christ has returned, and his new name is Baha'u'llah. The Lord of the age has come. And I want to share it with you because I love you. I also want to share that I have to step down as the chief of the board here at Tabernacle because I have to dedicate my life to Baha'u'llah." This declaration that he did before the entire congregation went through the gossip vine like wildfire. My grandmother called my mother, Katie, did you hear about what happened at Charles? Because my mother and Charles Abercrombie knew each other. They actually went to high school together. So they knew each other. And the Abercrombies, again, were a huge family. I mean, huge. Not just his family, but he had like 10 brothers and sisters, and they all had 8 or 10 kids. So anyway, he had 8 or 10 brothers and sisters. But anyway, she called my mother and said, "Katie, you know what? That Baha'i thing has got Charles Abercrombie. He's become a Baha'i." And so the word was it was crazy, man. It was big news. So anyway, I kept going to these firesides and seeking this literal proof of Baha'u'llah. And patiently, Papa Jake, who was a master Bible man, just patiently walked me through so many things. the literal, figurative, statements in the Bible about the Lord of the age. And one of the amazing things is, and still is, the love for Jesus, the Christ, that Papa Jake shared, in which I have in my heart. My love for Jesus, the Christ, is greater than it was even when I was just a Christian, because I
That's
really
beautiful.
come to fully realize, Christ, and then knowing Baha'u'llah was his return of his spirit.
Yeah. And how powerful was it for you to be in these rooms with blacks and whites mixing together at that time in Jim Crow South? And how dangerous was it for the Baha'is to gather that way?
Well, it was very dangerous, but they were so bold, Rainn, that people were just totally startled by the brazenness of the Baha'is to live their teaching, that I don't know what they thought, but I think they thought, well, these people must be crazy. We don't know what they will do if they're willing to step out and do this. A powerful example is one, the Benson family, who were Baha'is, in whose house I went to my first fireside. They were a couple from Michigan. He was an attorney. She was an MD, professionals. Dick came to Greenville. This guy, white man, goes and rents an office in the black professional building. People say, who the hell is this guy crazy? Or maybe he's a black guy who's been passing as white and now he wants to come home. People trying to...
Yeah.
But everybody knew Dick was white. Then he hired a black secretary, which was like, it was just, this stuff was unheard of. And a funny story quickly is he enjoyed both being professional, doctor, lawyer. She's at Greenville General Hospital. The Greenville Professional Association had a drive to have new members, and they were part of the Greenville Professional Association, and they encouraged everybody, bring new members. And so, because Dick was in the black professional building, he knew Bill Gibson. Well, who is Bill Gibson? Bill Gibson, who would later, not too much later, become the national chairman of the board of directors of the NAACP. So Dick, so here's Doc Gibson, who's a dentist, and Dick befriends him, becomes his friend. So Dick and Joy take Bill Gibson to the White Professional Association's meeting as a new member. They're recruiting new members. Well, not only did they not let Doc Gibson in, they kicked the Bensons out.
Wow.
But it stopped at that because.
But the Baha'is were putting their money where their mouth was in terms of.
They were living it. They were living it, man.
But you were saying that it could be dangerous sometimes.
Yeah. Well, it could be dangerous because of reactionary folk. Much later on, we had whites who, fast forward, in a Baha'i Youth Project in Greenville, who were harassing the integrated Baha'i group of service students who were there. Among them, Richard Thomas, Bojack Mangrum, Patsy Sims, Jim Sims, Carl Borton. But we were constantly, they came there to tutor kids who were integrating the public schools in the fall of '64 because of desegregation. And so we all were, and it was at the Baptist church that I had belonged to. And so incidentally, you asked, well, how did I decide to become a Baha'i? One, I saw these people doing these very bold actions. And I saw these black people and white people in a harmony, basic harmony, though they disagreed around issues like any group of people do. I remember Richard Thomas and Doug Rue used to fight like cats and dogs, philosophical fights and arguments about a whole range of stuff. But they had this brotherhood and friendship that, was rooted in being Baha'is and so forth. But I remember I was so impressed by this. And at this time, I'm investigating Baha'u'llah, and I'm impressed with their living this life. And I asked my minister, I said, Reverend Corbett, tell me about the Baha'i Faith. What do you know about Baha'is? He said, well, the Baha'is are good people, but you have to watch them. And so that gave me the signal that something wasn't right about these people, which made me continue to resist and go make them or disprove this claim that they had about Baha'u'llah. But this affected so many of us, young black kids. In my class, in my high school class, 6 of us became Baha'is together, same time.
Wow.
We were impressed with, 1, with Papa Jake, 2, with this action of this faith. And this was at the heart of the civil rights movement, remember? And one of the favorite things, I have sheep that are not of this fold, which is scripture, howbeit when the day of the one fold and the one shepherd shall come, and I will gather them all as my own. So, man, it just, the oneness of mankind, the unit that Baha'u'llah announced, all of it just came together. So we were oblivious in a lot of ways to some of the dangers that we lived around, that hovered around us, because we were so full of joy, Rainn, honestly, at having these new relationships, these new friendships, that we just weren't afraid. We didn't even think about it. I mean, once the car broke down coming back from Piedmont, South Carolina, at one of our friends' homes who had become a Baha'i with us. And we were an integrated group. And then all these real rednecks start to gather around because we had a flat tire and we were trying to fix it. They started pulling up in pickup trucks. And people in the crowd, it was really a crowd gathering. And we said, oh, man, we got to be ready to do some battle here. And God sent this guy comes along, white guy, and he sees it, looks at the situation, sees this crowd, and he says, what y'all doing here? What's going on here? We because there's niggas and white people out here. What they doing here? And so the guy says, and he was a redneck too, by look and tone, but he said, now wait a minute here. I'm a minister. I'm a man of God, and you can't do things to these people. Y'all best be on your way. Now I'm telling you, I'm a man of God. I'm minister. I'm Reverend so and so, and y'all just need to leave these people alone now.
Wow. Wow.
And
Christ sent someone along.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly, man. So basically, those are my early experiences of becoming a Baha'i. And I think the theme that, as I say, touched me and so many of my Black friends, which was in my community, was Baha'u'llah's message that one fold, one shepherd. There's a place at the table for everyone, and there's especially a place for us at this table, and we're welcome to this feast. And so that got my attention, and I decided, hey, this is salvation to my soul and what I'm, going to try and pursue. And as we all say as Baha'is, I recognize the direction in which I should be going. I haven't arrived anywhere, but I'm working on staying in that direction.
You are able to set your sail. Now, so this is the kind of the precursor to the work that was done in the late 60s and early 70s in South Carolina. So were you able to see the flourishing of the Baha'i community there in South Carolina kind of taking off after this point?
Well, yeah, it was a few years later that the mass teaching movement started in South Carolina. And meanwhile, I went to school, dropped out of school to go into the civil rights movement as an organizer, lost my student deferment, got drafted, was sent to Vietnam, and being a Baha'i, which was a momentary wrestle with the whole notion of whether or not I should skip out on this unjust war or obey the Baha'i teachings, which is we have to be obedient to the laws of the land. And in our instance, in America, we could serve as non-combatants, as conscientious objectors. So I went into the Army as a conscientious objector and was trained in the medical corps and became a medic. I was a platoon medic in the 1st Infantry Division in Vietnam from 1966 to 1968.
Wow.
And when I came back from Vietnam, went to UMass, I went back to Greenville and got involved again in civil rights activities, and again a test and challenge to faith, trying to balance the injustices being heaped upon Black with the fact that I wanted to do something and how to do that thing.
And this is, I imagine, a big test that contemporary people are facing, which is how to balance social activism and fighting injustice, especially racial injustice, while avoiding conflict and contention and obeying the law of the land and seeking to have that greater vision of Baha'u'llah's kind of universal spiritual healing. So you were having those same tests in 1968 that so many people are having today.
Huge challenge. One of my close friends who's dead now, Steve Moore, who was a Baha'i, and actually his son was in L.A. He was a reporter for the L.A. Times. Joshua, was it Joshua? That was his oldest.
Solomon
Moore.
Yeah, Solomon Moore. I knew him back in the day, sure.
Okay, Solomon's dad and I were high school. He was one of my best friends in high school. Steve Moore, Ricky Abercrombie. We were all,
Yeah, this gang, you got your whole Baha'i posse from 1963 in Greenville, yeah.
And in fact, we were coming from Steve's house when the car broke down and that incident.
Okay. It all comes together. All right.
So anyway, but we're in this challenge. Steve was at Orangeburg during the Orangeburg Massacre. This was before Kent State, when they shot down the Black kids at South Carolina State. College, it's university now. Well, Steve was literally one of the students there, narrowly almost got killed. And that's a whole nother story. But that fueled, I had just come back from Vietnam. I was at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. I get a call in the middle of the night. A night sergeant comes, gets me out of the barrack. You got an emergency call. Is Steve Moore on the line? Smitty, they're killing us down here. They're going to kill us all. I got to get out of here. I got to get out of town. I don't have any money. I got to get a bus out of here. Next morning, I wired him money, through Western Union so he could jump a bus from Orangeburg, South Carolina to Detroit. Steve worked with Cleveland Sellers, who was a gigantic civil rights figure in South Carolina. In fact, his son, Cleveland's son, Omari Sellers, is a guy you see on CNN all the time as a commentator now. But that's Cleve Sellers' son. But literally people knew Steve's fellow students were killed at that at that massacre in Orangeburg. So anyway,
and a lot of people don't know about this. Just a little backstory: the Orangeburg massacre at South Carolina State University, was that a historic black college?
Yes, it was.
Yeah. So 200 unarmed black student protesters protesting the war. People, they opened fire on them. 3 people were shot and killed. 28 people were wounded. As you were talking, I pulled it up, but I had read about this, and this is a precursor to Kent State and so many other terrible massacres, but just a brutal, horrific bloodbath.
The challenge in that era was trying to find that fine line. And there was so much tension and so much frustration and anger. I mean, I had to resolve. I'm just back from Vietnam. I've seen not gazillion, but dozens of people die for nothing, basically. And a lot of black kids die. And here I am back home, and they're killing black kids on college campuses.
Wow.
What do I do? How do I engage in this struggle? And the way that I chose, because, I mean, it was really a choice. It was tempting. Hey, man, take up arms. Take up arms. I was a conscientious objector in Vietnam, but at the same time, I was saying, I truly do know who the enemy is here, because they're killing my brothers and sisters. I see them. But I decided that the route to make way of this nonsense is to become engaged in education, that this would be the way that I could impact the black community, that I could counter all the horrific things that were happening, if I could contribute to shaping minds and hearts. So that helped me avoid a direct engagement in violent things. But I still was on the periphery of serious self-defense, and had to, later I'll tell you other stories about the National Assembly actually corralling a group of us, including Steve and Bob Henderson, a whole bunch. I didn't know Bob then, but he was corralled in with a group of us that the National Spiritual Assembly, Richard Thomas was one of them, Bojack Mangum, who we were on the very edge of Baha'i law.
Pushing the envelope.
I mean, our big issue was we had weapons in the Black Awareness Coordinating Committee office, though we weren't aggressive with them, but we said, hey, and we were all young guys. We'd all read the Dawnbreakers, and so we were using the guise of Fort Tabarsi to say, hey, the Bob, you get excited and you do your interpretations, and the local assembly would say, no, that's not the way. So anyway, but we escaped that by actually a loving National Spiritual Assembly who rounded up, a whole bunch of us, Win Claiborne, oh my God, and brought us to the National Center in Wilmette for a weekend to talk to us. And Glenford Mitchell was in. He was a young guy then. He's older than I am, but he was there with others to talk about the way, as Baha'is, that we could resolve issues of injustice without resorting to violence. It truly was a loving love. You talk about a shepherd. They shepherded. There were about 16 of us who had been giving headaches to various Baha'i assemblies across the country because we were on the very fringe of doing something crazy.
Wow.
So
I don't know much about your sporting life, but I do know that you were cited in a Sports Illustrated November 2005 cover story as one of the men who changed the face of college football. What is, real quick, what was that story and how is that related to?
Well, just, so I became a Baha'i in high school. My wife bought me a T-shirt that says, ex-jock, the older I get, the better I was. So I'll tell you the better I was story. But actually, I was a very good high school athlete, sprint champion in South Carolina, and a good football player, a really good football player, and was recruited as one of the first, the three blacks who integrated Division I football in the old Confederate South. Three of us went to Wake Forest College, university now, in 1964, and we integrated Division I football in the old Confederate South. It was a tumultuous time. We were not warmly greeted there, though acts of amity actually were the cause of our being there. The coach at that time, Coach Bill Tate, who was at Illinois, had only accepted the job at Wake Forest with the promise from the athletic director that he could recruit black players. The reason he made that conditional on his going to Wake Forest as the head coach was that his roommate in Illinois, where he played and was an All-American, his roommate was the fantastic Bobby Mitchell, who was, legendary in the NFL, only second to Jim Brown. Bobby Mitchell played for the Washington Redskins, but he was roommates with Bill Tate at Illinois, and they were best friends. And Bill Tate said, there's no way in hell I can take a coaching job and not recruit guys like Bobby. I mean, that ain't happening. I ain't doing it. So because of that close friendship he had with Bobby Mitchell, he insisted on that when he went to Wake Forest. Wake Forest quickly surveyed the land, and Bob Grant, Butch Henry, and myself were the top prospects, black kids in the South at that time as football players. And so they recruited us, and that's how I went to Wake Forest, Wake Forest College.
Well, there's a natural transition there. You're talking about these acts of race amity that helped make that happen. So I want to fast forward to 2010 and the Center for Race Amity and the work for which you're best known. I'm sorry to be skipping over you getting a PhD in education and incredible work that you've done throughout your life, but skipping ahead to this Center for Race Amity, what was the inspiration behind that? Wasn't it essentially spoken of by Abdu'l-Baha?
Yeah, it was. Abdu'l-Baha introduced really the power and the concept and the moral strength and value of amity in directing or asking, as he would in his spiritual guidance, Agnes Parson, a white woman from Washington, D.C., to organize a convention to bring people together in amity after the horrific things that happened in America in the Red Summer in 1919, where blacks were slaughtered across this country right at the ending of World War I. There was great stress in America. Agnes went to the Holy Land to visit Abdu'l-Baha, and he suggested to Agnes that she want to create a convention, an opportunity to bring the races together in friendship, in amity. That gave the footwork for this whole concept. Just a quick analysis, the abbreviated position of amity is this: in the sphere of human relationships, the most powerful relationship is family. The second most important relationship are friends. And sometimes actually friendship supersedes family relationships. So to the extent that we can create genuine friendships among people is to the extent that we create relationships that are indissoluble and eternal. So Abdu'l-Baha suggested that a convention of amity to focus on people creating relationships be held, and which is what Agnes Parsons and her True to the Baha'i MO Black friends put together. She and Coralie Cook, Elaine Locke, Louis Gregory, cabal to do this thing in segregated DC. Fast forward, my being aware of that history, and when I founded the National Center, well, that cued me that the work that I was doing in dialogues as a part of the National Spiritual Assembly of Baha'is had a race unity committee. And one of the things we did was during the era, particularly in the Clinton administration early years, when he had the national dialogues on race, the committee, we spearheaded having neighborhood dialogues on race. In fact, we still use the materials aimed at bringing people together in neighborhoods, which is different than the town hall meetings, which goes to basically like-minded people. Only people come out to those meetings or people who are sort of predisposed to the idea of race unity. But actually having dialogues immediately in your neighborhood, not across town, but we're talking about the people next door. That was a prescription for this movement, Neighborhood Dialogues on Race, which I cheered the group to do that. Some of my brothers and sisters who are now in the next world, Nat Rothstein and others were on the committee. We put these things together and started this Neighborhood Dialogue on Race. And the idea was to build race amity, cross-racial friendships, and so forth. So we see, I see the power of amity as a lasting solution, but also a requisite for really allowing people to talk about and discuss race. Race is very, very personal, very personal. And most people on a superficial or initial level is going to lie about it. They're not going to tell you the truth. I'm not going to tell you what I'm really thinking, you know. But if I establish a relationship with you, Rainn, as a part of having that relationship and building trust, I will start to tell you what I really feel. And because you have a relationship with me, you won't be offended by some of the stupid stuff I might say, or vice versa, because I have a relationship. Well, this brother has a good heart, so I know it's not with any ill intent, and so I can stomach it. But right now, most dialogue is, I don't know you, but I'm going to talk about the most sensitive thing in your life, and let's just lay it out there on the table, man. And there's only so much either way that I'm going to take, you know, in that dialogue. So our approach in the work in the Center for Race Amity is to engage people in a relationship so that they can have a meaningful, in-depth discussion around issues of race that don't start and end in words, but that lead to long-term action and powerful, lasting, loving friendships. And so we know that power, and that's the work we've done with the films, that at the center of all lasting progress in America, I'm talking about things that count, that are registered as things that have changed people's lives and afforded access and equity and social justice. At their core, you find close, loving, cross-racial, cross-cultural friendships. You have amity. And there's a power, there's an exponential moral power in amity. Never takes a large number of people. I mean, if you look at the civil rights movement, a minuscule percentage of Americans were involved in the civil rights movement. Of course, now
Yeah.
everybody and his mother was at Selma, you know.
It's kind of like Woodstock. Anyone who was alive in the hippie days was at Woodstock. But it's, yeah.
But you know, the joke that if everybody was in Selma who said they were there, the bridge would have collapsed, you know. So, but that whole uh, movement, there was just a minuscule percentage of Americans who are actually in it, but the moral power. And Dr. King, you know, articulated it so beautifully about the arc of the moral universe bending toward justice. There's an exponential power, truly, that's unleashed. So spiritual moral power in these, in the binding of hearts, and in the Baha'i writings. It's clearly articulated. So powerful is the light of unity that it can illuminate the whole earth. So there is an inherent suasion in these acts. And so that's how with so little, so few get so much done. You know, there were very, very few people in any of these movements. But so we've invested. We're not stupid. You know, we look up, we say, oh, so that's what the power is, right? Well, why am I going to go out here wasting my time spending it on some other notions and ideas when I know the net results of this particular association and friendship is what really moves the needle. So I can do two things. I can invest in that, but at the same time, I can serve as a support and solace, or as I said recently in our newsletter, the National Center, we position ourselves as the water boy to the activist movement. We bring sustenance, we bring refreshing, spiritual, moral suasion, upliftment, because the battle is heated, and people need a break, man. They need caring. Their souls need caring. They get tired. They get weary. So that's a part of our role. And of course, we engage in service as well, in service projects directly to humanity. We have our programs that also are direct programs and things that we do to engage in advancing access and equity, education, and we use media a great deal to do that. We try to reach out to we reach out to young people a great deal. We try and bridge people across the divide through various projects.
So my question is, an organization such as yours might be open to criticism, and I imagine it's been criticized in the past by people saying, wait a minute, we need justice. We need laws changed. We need police forces changed. We need economics redistributed. We don't need people having picnics and sharing stories and fostering amity. Is your organization sometimes seen as kind of like milk toasty and old fashioned and not cutting edge? And if so, how do you answer those charges?
Well, two things. One, if we are doing what we hope to do, we're actually bringing people from different spaces into the same space, which is not milquetoast. I mean, if the problem is division racially, then the solution is to bridge this division and bring people together. So there's nothing milquetoast. It will be no different than saying, because there are white people working in the Black Lives Matter movement and bridging together with black folk to move that. There's nothing milquetoast about that. They have a relationship that's moving toward change. The same with if a community is celebrating and reaching out in a Race Amity Day activity, or if they're engaging by using our board game, breaking it down toward E Pluribus Unum, which actually brings people together to delve deep into the issues that divide us. There's nothing milquetoast about that. The idea that you can get people from different persuasions to even come consider the same table without a disintegration and a disunity amongst them is not milquetoast. I think people who, and I understand people are impatient and can be impatient, but the prescription and the observation is that, it's a long and thorny road, and that there are things that everybody must do to help pave that road in a way that allows everybody to travel down that road. So it's not people sitting around. Race Amity is not kumbaya. And if you observe again the powerful relationships that make change, and one of them, example A, is the founding of America, and the relationship of Charles Thompson and T.D. Uskin, chief of the Delaware Nation. And
okay, I don't know this story. So what is this story?
well, essentially, Charles Thompson was the secretary of the Continental Congress, a terribly, in a positive way, moral person, to the extent that in his era, literally, people, as today people will say, I swear with my hand on a stack of Bibles, if they want to make a statement of veracity of truth. In his era, a common saying was, this is though Charles Thompson's hand is on it, when they wanted to make a statement of the truth of a matter. This is though Charles Thompson's. And so he was known as a moral guy. He was known because essentially he got his reputation for honesty. He came as an immigrant, and he dropped a dime on the British agents in Pennsylvania specifically, who were cheating Native peoples out of their land and falsifying documents, getting them drunk and having them put an X on a paper. And he was hired by the government and by the king to, investigate what was happening. And he basically told the truth, said, this is what's happening, Governor. This is what's happening, King George. This is all untrue. These people are lying. One of the native people who heard of it was T.D. Uskin, who was chief of the Delaware tribe. And at that time, this was during the French and Indian Wars, before the formation of America. And France and Britain were duking it out on who's going to control and own this new land. And at the first big battle, the French, because they had recruited native tribes as allies, they decimated the British at Duquesne. And they said, we're off. We're going to own this place. When T.D. Uskin found out about Thompson making these statements, he said, I will not engage in any treaty discussions unless this guy, Charles Thompson, is there to document it. Then he and Charles became close friends. He adopted Charles Thompson into the Delaware Nation.
Wow.
So when it came time for the big wars after Duquesne, the big wars in the French and Indian War, the French came and said, okay, Iroquois, Delaware Nation, we want you all to side with us against the British, because the French didn't have the numbers. The Brits had the numbers, but by getting the native people tribes, they had equal numbers or greater. T.D. Uskin said, well, Charles Thompson's my friend. I'm going to sit this out. Well, all of the other native nations said, yeah, you know what? We're sitting it out too. We ain't got no dog in this fight. And so basically, the British beat the French, okay, and put America on its path to becoming America. Had that not happened, easily, had that friendship not existed, you and I'd be speaking French right now. I mean, literally, that's truly an example of the power of cross-racial, cross-cultural friendship. And I can tell you a gazillion of other impactful relationship-based stories, not pie in the sky, not kumbaya, but where people across Black, I mean, the right there where you are. I mean, the friendship of Dolores Huerta and Fred Harris Sr. and Cesar Chavez, had that friendship not existed, the whole success of the United Farm Workers just would not have happened, period. And that's not because Smitty's saying it. It's because Dolores Huerta says, because of my friend, she calls Fred Ross Sr., who was she and Caesar's closest friend, the godfather of the Chicano movement.
Wow.
He's a white man.
Yeah.
And she says it because of their loving, hello, there's that word, their loving, deep friendship. And that's what's got to be imbued. Don't mistake loving with kumbaya. And that's what people do. And people swear, they quote the dear Martin Luther King every day, every hour. And nobody wants to talk about what Martin Luther King said about loving each other.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't escape it. You can't escape it. And so that's the piece that's missing. And that's what Amity brings to the table. Love, a loving relationship, which endures, is not on political whim or scholarly analysis.
All your talk of love reminded me of the most recent letter from the Universal House of Justice addressing racism in the United States. This is the July 22nd letter. And for those who haven't read it or studied it, it is absolutely extraordinary. But a couple paragraphs in, the Universal House of Justice says, ultimately the power to transform the world is affected by love. Love originating from the relationship with the divine, love ablaze among members of a community, love extended without restriction to every human being. This divine love, ignited by the word of God, is disseminated by enkindled souls through intimate conversations, which you were talking about earlier, that create new susceptibilities in human hearts, open minds to moral persuasion, and loosen the hold of biased norms and social systems, et cetera, et cetera. It goes on. You are channels for this divine love. Let it flow through you to all who cross your path. Infuse it into every neighborhood and social space in which you move to build capacity. There can be no rest until the destined outcome is achieved.
That's what I meant to have said, right? That's it. I mean, that's right on. And people who want to take the shortcut, because it's hard work to build loving relationships.
Yeah.
You have to bring yourself to task.
Yeah.
To deal with the approach to justice by other means is really to concentrate primarily outwardly and not inwardly. And we have to do both. And that's what love prompts us to do.
So, real quick, we have to wind up here pretty quick. I want you to tell me about this documentary that you made under the auspices of the Center for Race Amity, An American Story, Race Amity, and the Other Tradition. Can you give us a little tidbit about that?
Essentially, the film and our work follows the premise, the thesis of the other tradition. And simply put, in our society, in our history, in our national sociology, we are all familiar with the tradition of racism, going back to day one, 1619, when slaves arrived on these shores, and the ugly, ugly face and the brutality of the racist tradition in America.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, that racist tradition has existed and grown and mutated into various ugly and more ugly forms. There's always been a moral counterweight, a moral pushback to racism, always been present in our society, though in small groups of people banding together in loving friendship, sometimes 2, sometimes 10, sometimes 1,000, but banding together to push back and serve as a moral counterweight to racism, and using the exponential power of change inherent in amity.
So really what you're saying is that, again, going back to, it's not just kumbaya to talk about amity, that amity can be a spark, a catalyst for enormous social change. So it is a specific and vital tool, not just kind of a good, warm feeling in the heart.
Absolutely. That's a great summary. That is a great summary, Rainn. That's exactly what amity is. And so we say there's the racist tradition, and then there is the other tradition. And so in our society, we're totally ignorant, for the most part, of this other tradition. We don't know about the better in us and the people who have exemplified that in the fiercest of times. I mean, of course, the cruelty of George Floyd, and Breonna, all of these things that are happening, just these ugly, ugly things. People say, this just, how could this, well, things ever, I can't imagine having lived back in a time and a day and seeing someone coated with boiling tar because they were black. The brutality of that. What would my mind imagine about the escape and any progress to those bedeviled human beings who would do that to another human being? So, we have moved and we will move.
Yeah.
This is only a moment in time, and the power and the morality will prevail. The other tradition will prevail.
So what you're saying and your organization is saying in your award-winning documentary, this American story about race amity, is that it is crucial to educate ourselves about a history of systemic racism in the United States and the injustice around it, especially for white people. But it is also important to educate ourselves about this other history, this other tradition of race amity and friendship. Educating ourselves on this can help move us forward as well, that both of these things go hand in hand.
They absolutely go hand in hand and cannot progress one without the other, really. Race amity and creating that relationship, of course, will make you, if you aren't predisposed, to understand the other side of things. The other side would not necessarily lead you to amity, because I've seen so many well-intentioned people come together, and then when it gets into the counterpoint, the blame, grievance, rejection cycle, I call it, things can break down and freeze and not really go forward. It's getting beyond that and creating the basis that, hey, man, you're my brother and I accept you as that. And so that means I have to accept you as you are and work with you to change.
Yeah.
And vice versa. And vice versa. And we have to allow that. Otherwise, it won't change.
Yeah.
It just won't change.
Yeah.
And I'll tell one little story as I close, and I'm going to, people, I don't care what people think. But when I was a Baha'i youth, this is one of the most powerful moments in my life about the power of Baha'u'llah. I would go down to Frogmore, which is St. Helena's Island. It's formerly St. Helena's Island, but all the locals, we call it Frogmore. And they had a Baha'i at this Penn Center on Frogmore, where it was one of the few places in the state where blacks and whites could come together at the Penn Center, which is a Quaker-based center. Long story short, down there at a winter school, on my freshman year in college, Christmas break, we're sitting around the fire singing Kumbaya. And there was this Baha'i there. I'll just call him Jim. He was the poster child for the redneck Southern bald head cop. Okay. With all its burly features. And we're sitting there around this campfire. People are singing. And he was a cop. And this guy turns to me and he says, and we didn't really know each other. I mean, because we just gotten there for a day or so, and it was like a 3-day weekend. And he says, he said, that was a time that I would love to get my hands on a black boy like you and beat the shit out of him. He says, but because of Baha'u'llah, I know you're my brother. And it's because of Baha'u'llah. And that's all I can tell you. I can't tell you no more. Man, Rainn, it was profound in my heart.
Yeah.
It was profound in my heart. And so I know, and he wasn't just saying it. I mean, you as a white man would want to meet this dude on the road. No, you know what I'm saying? As a cop. I mean, but his heart.
A transformation.
I've been to a transformation. And so.
Beautiful.
I say we all have to know at the end of the day that salvation is within each of us. And that we just can't automatically write people off.
That's a beautiful story. William Smitty Smith, what an honor to hear your story and to hear your perspective. Congratulations on all the amazing work that you've done.
But wait, there's more. No, I'm just
Well, we could go on for another hour and a half, but maybe we need a part 2 to this. And by the way, you absolutely need to write a book about your early years. I
have a memoir. As soon as I get the National Race Amity Institute in Atlanta, which we're building and opening, and I'll tell you more about that offline at some point. Oh, it's fantastic. I mean, it's right diagonal from the Martin Luther King Center in Atlanta. And we've been
Wonderful.
gifted this space to create a national Race Amity Institute there to carry out these ideas and so forth. But we'll talk about that another time. So
That's fantastic. And people can find out more about Center for Race Amity.
raceamity.org.
That's great. That's great. We'll put the link below here on the podcast. And such an honor and a pleasure, Smitty, as always.
Thank you so much for having us. And actually, I'll see you for a short time at the National Race Amity Conference in November.
That's right. I'll be there.
All right.
However I can help. You know I'm there for you.
I know. Okay.
Much love, brother. Thank you so much.
Love you.
Love you too.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to Baha'i Blogcast. Hope you enjoyed the episode and the conversation. Check out more fun Baha'i stuff on Baha'iBlog.net. Thank you so much, and good night.